now would like to invite Professor Emeritus Bohdan Kordan, who will be setting the stage for the Congress, thinking about what the past has done, and for us to be thinking about what we want for the future. Dr. Kordan, thank you.
Good morning, everyone. The last time I spoke at a Triennial Congress was in 1996 at the 18th Triennial, so I'm glad to be back, to use the infamous words of Arnold Schwarzenegger. Hopefully, it won't take another 20, 30 years for me to reappear. But that being said, just as a brief, I was asked to speak for 30 minutes, but subsequently the program has changed, and so I'll try to reduce it to around 20 or so. The title of my presentation today is Ukrainian Canadians and Russia's War Against Ukraine, Political Challenges, Opportunities, and the Tasks Ahead. In its past, the Ukrainian Canadian community has faced extraordinary challenges. It would successfully meet these by focusing on what matters most, enabling it to persist and even thrive over time. Today, Russia's war against Ukraine has created its own set of challenges, and these too will need to be addressed. For instance, how to help Ukraine in its current struggle, how to communicate to the wider Canadian public the rationale for assisting Ukraine, and how to reach out and bring into the community those Ukrainians temporarily seeking refuge. These challenges are great, and as in the past, success will depend on focusing on the essentials. But for this to occur, there must be a clear understanding of what is at issue. In this war, Ukraine and its people have material needs. Many in the Ukrainian Canadian community are inspired to assist by providing aid to Ukraine and those displaced by the war. But is this all we can do? Is this all we should do? Material needs are symptomatic of deeper issues, and to find answers to these questions, perhaps we should begin by asking, what is at stake politically? What are Ukrainians fighting for? And what importance does this hold for us? The objective of Russia's war against Ukraine is to force Ukrainians to submit to its will. In looking to restore empire, Russia has taken steps to dismantle Ukraine's sovereignty and independence. Both, however, are contingent on freedom. Thus, at the most fundamental level, we can say that freedom is at stake. Ukrainians, of course, are fighting for their own freedom, but also freedom more generally. With this understanding, we find ourselves in a stronger position to respond meaningfully to the political needs of Ukrainians as a sovereign people. We could also convey, however, why this fight matters for us politically as Canadians. Since 2014 and Russia's initial invasion of Ukraine, there are those in Canada who actively question the need to get involved, arguing that this is not Canada's fight. Political cynicism or simple animus have worked to persuade against Canadian involvement. This campaign continues to this day as the war rages on. By answering the question, what is politically at stake, by providing a clear and unambiguous answer around the issue of freedom, we can attenuate some of this criticism. Herein, however, lies a hidden opportunity for Ukrainian Canadians. We can make the case in Canada for supporting Ukraine in a way that the people of Ukraine cannot, by speaking directly to our fellow citizens as Canadians, by reaffirming the core values and beliefs that Canadians hold dear, locating the conflict and Ukraine's need for support and language that Canadians know and understand. We are uniquely positioned to lead the country in a conversation about promoting Canadian perspectives and values abroad and helping Ukraine in the process. Further, as a community committed to values that underpin the Canadian experience, we can share with those displaced by war our hopes for Ukraine and its future. Offered up is a perspective on the political challenges and opportunities associated with the conflict. It is a perspective that emphasizes the values which have guided this community throughout its history: freedom, democracy, justice. These have not always been clearly articulated in the Ukrainian Canadian story, nor is their centrality to that story entirely appreciated, but their significance cannot be overstated. Moreover, just as these values have been foundational in defining the Ukrainian Canadian experience, they can also help guide us in our current and future tasks. Let me explain. Political challenges and opportunities, a closer look. In a December 2021 national survey conducted by the UCC, a series of questions were asked around the broad theme of community engagement. And fleshing out what it means to be a Ukrainian Canadian, the majority response was that their Ukrainian Canadian identity shaped their personal values. The respondents also stated that caring and knowing about the history and experience of Ukrainians in Canada was the most important feature defining what it meant to be Ukrainian Canadian. Both findings are significant because they highlight the idea that who we are socially and culturally is inextricably linked to our experience here in Canada. The question is, how well do we know that history? To a certain extent, we feel that we know the story of Ukrainians in Canada, but when queried further, we can see that we do not know it completely. There's no unifying narrative that we can point to that entirely captures the community's history. It is incomplete because our experience as a community is not fully chronicled in the life of the larger Canadian nation. It is further incomplete because as a community, we have not invested sufficiently in documenting, researching, writing, or narrating our history. There are, of course, anecdotes that capture the Ukrainian Canadian experience. These might best be understood as the struggle to preserve the community's autonomy and dignity within a larger national framework. To this end, there are singular moments that provide some insight into the nature of that struggle in Canada. Still, there is no overarching story that links the past and the present, here with there. We do not possess a full account about how the past relates to the present and how the struggle of Ukrainians in Canada connects with the struggle of the people in Ukraine. I do not wish to be misunderstood since we intuit that connection. Nevertheless, it's neither clearly articulated nor fully explained, despite the need to do so. For example, in the same national survey, when asked about what it means to be Ukrainian Canadian, the second most cited factor was caring about Ukraine. Ukrainian Canadians believe and feel that beyond knowing their history here in Canada, our relationship with Ukraine is of importance. But what is the story of that relationship beyond simple emotional attachment? How do we explain the strength of the relationship when for many, Ukraine is distant, puzzling, and even alien? Preserving Ukrainian traditions, promoting the Ukrainian language, publicly celebrating Ukrainian culture, attending the traditional churches, and participating in Ukrainian organizations reinforce that connection. For some, especially within the organized community, this is what matters most, defining what it means to be Ukrainian Canadian. But for the vast majority of the 1.4 million Canadians who self-identify as being of Ukrainian origin, perhaps 1 million or so, these traditional aspects of identity are marginal, limited, or passing interest. Still, they self-identify as Ukrainian. So what does this mean? Moreover, how does the organized community relate to this cohort, not defined by nor necessarily interested in the conventional markers of Ukrainian culture and society? Identity, as we well know, is not devoid of content. Social psychology tells us that our experiences define who we are. Implicit is that our experiences here in Canada determine our identity as a people. Our identity is specific to this place called Canada. As Ukrainian Canadians, we know this history, albeit sketchily, through vignettes that herald our accomplishments as a community. However, for the vast majority, notably those not connected to the organized community, the 1 million or so Canadians, they only know this history through familial accounts and memories that have been passed down through the ages. These are often indistinct, distant, and even elusive. Nevertheless, as stories, they are powerful, representing the narratives of personal struggle, determination, fortitude, and devotion. Collectively, these personal stories point to a history of commitment to this country and its institutions, underscoring the profound and deep belief in Canada and its values. The values associated with Canada's political, cultural, and social development, freedom, democracy, justice, have now become fully part of the collective worldview of Ukrainian Canadians. In building this country together by participating in Canada's national life and defending it, they have become fully integrated into the Canadian fabric, supporting the country's values. Like their fellow Canadian citizens, Ukrainian Canadians historically have stood by the idea of liberty and justice. Moreover, as we have come to appreciate, Ukrainian Canadians have demonstrated an unflappable commitment to these ideals despite the travails they endured. Their children honor them by cherishing their memory and embracing those same values in the expectation of a fulfilled life in Canada. The hopes and aspirations of Ukrainian Canadians were and continue to be both personal and political. Freedom and rights are preconditions for a life lived with dignity. It is what Ukrainian Canadians have always wanted for themselves and their children. But this also extends to the ancestral homeland from whence their families came. What they look to secure here in Canada is what they wish for Ukraine. That Ukraine might be free was always the goal, that it might be democratic was always the ambition. That these might be achieved in their lifetime was always the hope. Ukraine's independence was realized in 1991. Since independence, the fight for democracy and rule of law continues, and concern for Ukraine among Ukrainian Canadians remains. This is the Ukrainian-Canadian story that connects the past with the present, that connects here with there. It is a story of who we are as a people and as a community. We do not fully grasp it in its entirety or complexity. Nevertheless, no matter how fragmentary it may be, we never tire of telling its core elements, that of struggle, determination, and faith in the future. We retell these aspects of the story because we believe and feel them to be true. However, we also retell the main features of this narrative, such as it is, because it also allows us to know ourselves and our role in building this country. It allows us to understand the ideas and beliefs that have guided us throughout our journey here in Canada, and helps us become more aware of what it means to be a citizen of this country. Repeating the core elements of the Ukrainian-Canadian story, in effect, is important from the point of view of the community's identity. But identity is also framed, according to anthropologists, by how others perceive us. Identity issues are, of course, potentially divisive, us versus them. In diversity lies potential disunity. Nevertheless, an opportunity is presented here. The language of values allows us to speak to each other on a common basis by expressing our belief in principles and ideals. For example, that we are a just and tolerant people. We invite others to join us in making Canada stronger, helping us overcome our potential divisiveness. In sharing our experiences, we also let others know when we have either erred or succeeded as a nation. One example helps us understand this better. The community's drive to secure redress for World War I internment was aimed principally at making Canadians aware of this historical wrong. Redress, however, was never about reparation, but rather reconciliation by way of awareness and acceptance of this historical injustice. Significantly, through the process of redress, we as a community highlighted the importance of minority rights and rule of law as democratic requirements, without which there can be no social peace. By bringing attention to this injustice, we have broadened the lexicon of rights in Canada. As a community, we have contributed to the ongoing conversation about how to achieve and even protect the cause of democracy and human rights at home. The community's commitment to Ukraine in its current struggles also parallels this endeavor. As supporters of democracy, our interest in the war sprouts from the need to extend help to those in Ukraine fighting for self-determination. We as a community do this not because we possess a hatred for Russia or its cruel leadership. Rather, we support Ukraine because we believe in freedom and justice. By helping Ukraine in its fight, however, we also help Canada realize its global role as the guarantor of international law, liberty, and rights. By emphasizing that the struggle is about international justice, we further animate those Ukrainian Canadians operating on the periphery of the community, as well as those Canadians who might otherwise look away. The political challenge all along has been for Ukrainian Canadian voices and perspectives to be heard and understood in official circles, to overcome the biases that look to cast ethnocultural communities as nothing more than pressure groups. Thus, the Ukrainian Canadian community's support for Ukraine is interpreted by some as being driven by parochial sentimentality that works against Canada's national interests. Openly flogged by influential policymakers, this viewpoint seeks to discredit a community that has argued the principle of that the principle of national sovereignty must be defended, freedom supported, and aggression resisted. By reducing politics to a calculus of national interests and trivializing and dismissing the community's efforts as nothing more than ethnic lobbying, the contemptuous nature of their criticism is revealed. However, by consistently declaring, as the community has done, that the defense of liberty and the rule of law is both just and right, Ukrainian Canadians uphold a respected Canadian foreign policy position and tradition. Values matter, because this is who we are as Canadians, and contrary to the critics, support for values are in Canada's national interest. Being heard and understood is important. It follows then that the community's essential story and message must be clear and precise. Only in this way are we able to convey our beliefs and aspirations as a foundation for engagement and dialogue with others. This applies to how we should converse with our fellow citizens. It equally applies to recent arrivals fleeing the war in Ukraine. There is, of course, the immediate importance of helping with the physical needs of those displaced by the violence. But with displacement, there is the deeper psychological need of belonging that also must be addressed. How then might the new arrivals be brought into the community? What will be the basis for the introduction and integration into the organized community and the larger Canadian society? How might they help us as a community strengthen our connection with Ukraine? The history of the organized community helps us navigate this endeavor. Committed to democracy, liberty, justice, it is imperative that we communicate to the new arrivals the idea that the values which have guided us in the past are what informs the present. Past support for Ukrainian independence and sovereignty, for instance, was based on the right of self-determination within a democratic context. The community's support for Ukraine in the current struggle continues along the same lines. Ukraine shall be free, democratic, and sovereign. This view echoes the wider Canadian perspective on international security and peace, and the historical principles governing its foreign policy orientation. To be part of Canada, therefore, is to acknowledge and accept the values that serve as drivers behind Canada's national identity and foreign policy. In doing so, those who have fled the carnage of war come to know and appreciate not only Canada, but the Ukrainian Canadian community, a community guided by the same principles and beliefs. Knowledge of the community's basic history and an appreciation of the values that underpin it help new arrivals to recognize their own role and how they might assist Ukraine at this perilous time. Having experienced the violence, they are aware of the stakes. But it's also vital they understand the political context in which this war was imposed on Ukraine. A dysfunctional political system rife with corruption, unresolved identity issues, a weak and ineffective civil society all work to undercut Ukraine's independence and sovereignty over these past 30 years. Since the war, the people of Ukraine have united in common cause. However, if unresolved, the problems remain a threat, having the potential to undermine recent gains. By drawing on their experiences here in Canada and sharing with family and friends back home the values that inform Canadian society, the new arrivals can help address these issues. Moreover, as part of the Canadian story, we, the Ukrainian Canadian community, are uniquely situated to assist them in this task. In doing so, however, we also benefit. By working with them, we strengthen our own bond and commitment to Ukraine. These then are the political challenges within which lie opportunities. Our history as a community in Canada has revealed that as long as we remain faithful to the values that guide us, these challenges can be met. Still, we must undertake certain political tasks to ensure that they will be met. What might these be? The political tasks. The long history of the Ukrainian Canadian community in this country highlights our integration into its very fabric, but it has not been without a fight. In this, we see parallels between here and there, between us and our kindred in the ancestral home. In Canada, we have struggled for freedom and justice, much like the people of Ukraine over the many years. Through this connection, Ukrainian Canadians are uniquely positioned to understand the travails that beset Ukraine. Moreover, defined by values born of our struggles in Canada, we can provide a context and even make a legitimate claim as to why Ukraine's fight is Canada's fight. This knowledge allows us as a community to engage with others in a meaningful way, but our message must be clear and unequivocal. We must be unapologetic in our views. Moreover, we must take every opportunity to express these views so that we may be understood and heard before our fellow citizens, before Canada's politicians, and even those fleeing the war, so that everyone may know what is at stake. As we prepare briefs for government, speak with politicians and ministry officials, engage the media, hold rallies, and talk both to our fellow citizens and recent arrivals, we must always preface our remarks and statements and arguments with the assertion that our position is that of Canadians. We must be clear. We are guided by Canadian values, doing Canada's business, and advancing its interests. Make no mistake about it, we must be clear because there are doubters and naysayers who oppose Canada's role in supporting Ukraine. There are also those who find the endless petitioning of Ukrainian Canadians tiresome. And then there are those traumatized by the barrage of images that document the horrors and tragedy of war who want this simply to end and at any price, including exchanging territory for so-called peace. But Canada's foreign policy does not stop because of a misguided view that Canadians can ignore or wish the war away. Canada is part of the global community and cannot escape its international responsibilities. Thus, we must be there to remind those who would oppose, dismiss, or otherwise turn away by asking, what does Canada stand for? What principles should guide it in confronting tyranny, lawlessness, and destruction. Canada is doing much militarily along with other international partners in assisting Ukraine. As publicly expressed by President Zelensky, the people of Ukraine are grateful for this assistance. But politically speaking, Canada can and should do more. Moreover, as a community, we can help elevate Canada's voice as a valued and respected partner committed to defending human rights, upholding international law, promoting peace and security. In the plenary sessions and workshops to follow, there will be many ideas, proposals, and recommendations brought forward. I neither pretend to know nor can predict what these might be. I have my views and preferences, though. These include Canadian support for a special international criminal tribunal on Russian aggression, Canadian insistence on ICC indictments and prosecution of Russian military commanders and officers for war crimes, a Canadian leadership role regarding the democratization of UN structures, notably the UN Security Council, and Canadian backing for Ukraine's NATO bid as a security choice, but also as a viable plan for peace. Further, this war will end. Now is the time to build a community civic infrastructure, a youth corps, for example, to engage in the reconstruction of Ukraine, and for us to persuade Canada to invest in cultural diplomacy, a Diefenbaker, a Martin or Andreychuk Institute in Kyiv, to increase democratic awareness and rule of law in Ukraine. All these proposals align with Canada's traditional values-based foreign policy orientation. We as Canadians should insist on and prepare to support these and other democratic, humanitarian, and justice initiatives. Moreover, we need to bring those recently displaced by the war into the community by sharing with them knowledge of our contributions as a community committed to freedom and justice. For this to occur, however, we must redouble our efforts to know our history and the values that underpin it. Here, I will make a final argument. We should invest as a community in ways that we have not in making our narrative in this country known and understood. By providing focused support, we can guide those institutions, both internal and external to the community, universities and museums, and those working in various disciplines, the humanities, social sciences, and the arts, to begin the process of storytelling, discovery, and illumination. Only in this manner will we be able to know both ourselves and how we fit into the larger Canadian framework. Only in this way will we be able to connect with those who self-identify as of Ukrainian origin but are not part of the organized community. Only in this way will we be able to succeed in making a case before our fellow citizens for justice and freedom in Ukraine, as well as for the many Ukrainians whose lives have been shattered by Russia's illegal and unjust war. Thank you very much.